It was the only reason I wanted to do the last season, to be able to do this.
Alan Alda just revealed a hidden truth, one he kept silent for decades. And it changes everything we thought we knew about MASH. For years, fans believed they knew the heart of the show. A brilliant ensemble cast, clever writing, and a seamless blend of humor and heartbreak. But what most never realized was that the success of MASH came at a cost. Beneath the award-winning performances and iconic catchphrases was a storm few dared to acknowledge. A storm fueled not by ego or resentment, but by an intense battle for artistic control. And now, at 89, Alda has finally peeled back the curtain. MASH wasn't just television. It was a movement. At a time when the Vietnam War still haunted American consciousness, the show dared to speak the unspeakable. Wrapped in laughter was the sting of war, the absurdity of bureaucracy, and the raw humanity of those trapped in between. It broke ground. With every line, every episode, every moment. Viewers didn't just watch MASH, they felt it. It made them laugh, cry, and question everything. But while the audience experienced a cathartic journey, those behind the scenes walked a tighter, more painful rope. Alan Alda was more than the face of MASH. He was its soul. As the series evolved, so did his role. He wrote, directed, and ultimately shaped much of its later seasons. But such power came with pressure and resistance. It wasn't about hate, Alda recently admitted. It was about control. A phrase loaded with tension and a hint of regret. This wasn't a petty feud. It was a philosophical war over what MASH was meant to be. For Alda, it was never just entertainment. It was about truth, real characters, real emotions, and sometimes that meant stepping on toes to get there. What makes this revelation so startling is how long it was buried. For decades, the cast maintained a united front. Smiles at award shows, praise in interviews. But now, the carefully crafted image is cracking, revealing the very human chaos underneath. Alda's confession is not an attack, a reminder that even the most beloved creations are born from conflict. His words pull back the velvet curtain, exposing a world where vision clashed with tradition, where passion met resistance, and where the show's authenticity came at the cost of a quiet war behind the scenes. But what started as a creative disagreement would soon grow into something far more complicated. The camera never caught it, but the tension on set was undeniable, and it started with a single vision that refused to compromise. Jackie Cooper, a seasoned Hollywood veteran, walked onto the set of MASH with a clear plan and a deep respect for structure. For Cooper, the rules of directing were sacred. Scripts were to be followed, shots were to be blocked, and every moment needed to fit the blueprint. But Alan Alda didn't believe in blueprints, not when it came to storytelling. To Alda, truth lived in the unpredictable, the stutter in a line, the unscripted glance, the raw, unscheduled moment. And that belief didn't just challenge the norm, it shook the very foundation Cooper stood on. Their clash wasn't rooted in ego. It wasn't about pride or personality. It was a brutal, honest collision between two worldviews. Cooper wanted precision. Alda wanted life. And when those two forces met, sparks flew. Alda, already stepping into a leadership role as actor, writer, and eventual director, saw the show evolving away from slapstick and into something real. It was about making it real, he later explained. That meant pushing actors to go deeper, encouraging improvisation and rejecting the rigidity that Cooper saw as essential. The set became a silent battlefield, not of insults, but of ideas. Lines were drawn, not with words, but with creative choices. Those who worked behind the scenes began to notice the strain. Insider whispers from production reported moments of sharp disagreement, a pause too long between takes, a correction delivered with too much force, meetings that ended with one storming out, another sitting in silence. But neither Alda nor Cooper allowed the conflict to derail the production. Their professionalism, while strained, never broke. Yet, the tension lingered in the air like static ICE, ready to snap at any moment. And, eventually, it did. As Alda's influence on the show grew, Cooper's role quietly began to fade. He directed fewer episodes. His grip loosened. Alda, with his relentless pursuit of emotional truth, had shifted the show's gravity. This wasn't a victory, and Alda never framed it as such. It was a transformation, painful, necessary, and deeply personal. The fallout from their creative duel reshaped MASH. The characters became more grounded. The stories cut deeper. And while Cooper's contributions remained foundational, the heart of the show began to beat in Alda's rhythm. That rhythm was messy, spontaneous, and unforgettable. It was no longer about delivering lines. It was about delivering truth. But that truth had a cost. Because once Alda had navigated the creative battlefield with Cooper, he found himself facing a new challenge. And this time, it wasn't with a director. It was with someone much closer, a co-star. They looked like best friends on screen, but off-screen, their creative energy sometimes ignited sparks. When Mike Farrell joined MASH in Season 4, the show was already a cultural phenomenon. The pressure was enormous. Replacing a beloved character like Trapper John meant stepping into the spotlight with precision. And Farrell delivered, not just with charm, but with heart. He didn't try to mimic or replace. Instead, he brought a new kind of energy, one that leaned into emotional realism, subtle vulnerability, and a quiet strength that made his character, B.J. Honeycutt, unforgettable. But that fresh energy also came into direct contact with Alan, Alda's fire. And what followed was something no one saw coming. Farrell, like Alda, wasn't just there to read lines. He had a vision. But while Alda leaned into spontaneity, using improvisation as a weapon to crack open emotional truths through comedy, Farrell believed in structure, letting the depth of a moment settle, letting the silences speak. This difference wasn't small. It was foundational. And on a set where every second counted, where every scene mattered, the contrast occasionally burst into creative friction. These weren't shouting matches or dramatic fallouts. They were quiet storms, unspoken tension, heated discussions behind closed doors. Two brilliant minds chasing the same goal through very different paths. Farrell would later say, he had high standards, sometimes intimidatingly so. It wasn't a complaint, it was a confession. Working with Alda meant being under constant pressure to deliver something extraordinary. And for someone like Farrell, who valued integrity just as fiercely, that pressure often collided with personal instincts. Scenes that felt emotionally grounded to him might be seen by Alda as too restrained, too predictable. And moments Alda found brilliant in their chaos could feel, to Farrell, like a detour from the truth. It was a tug-of-war, with no clear villain, just two men refusing to settle for less. But here's the twist. The friction never broke them. It built something rare. Their rivalry wasn't toxic. It was transformative. Their push and pull made scenes electric. That on-screen chemistry wasn't just acting. It was forged in the fires of mutual challenge. They forced each other to rise, higher, to dig deeper. And somehow, through every disagreement, there remained a bedrock of admiration. Farrell respected Alda's relentless pursuit of authenticity. Alda valued Farrell's emotional precision. The tension, instead of tearing them apart, bound them closer. It reflected the soul of MASH, where laughter and pain coexisted, where friendship survived even through the roughest battles. Their dynamic mirrored the show itself, a delicate balance between humor and heartbreak, chaos and clarity. And while they never spoke about it in dramatic terms, the results were clear. The best episodes, the ones etched into television history, often carried that invisible tension between them, and it made the storytelling real. But not every MASH star entered the set with such harmony. For some, just landing the role felt like surviving a war of its own, because not everyone was meant to be there. And some came terrifyingly close to missing their moment altogether. MASH, as we know it, nearly didn't exist. One scheduling twist changed everything. The show that became a cultural force that redefined the boundaries of television drama and comedy came dangerously close to unraveling before it ever truly began. And the reason? Timing. Pure, unpredictable timing. Loretta Swit, the actress, who would go on to embody the fierce and unforgettable Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, was already under contract with another network when the role was offered to her. That contract, for a show that never even got off the ground, stood between her and the role that would define her legacy. It was a miracle of timing, she later recalled. The other show collapsed just in time. And just like that, fate cleared a path for her to walk into television history. But not all casting came down to timing. Some came down to sheer nerve. Larry Linville didn't audition to be loved. He accepted that his character, Major Frank Burns, would be despised, and he relished the idea. For Linville, this wasn't a curse. It was a challenge. He wasn't there to win the audience over. He was there to provoke them, to make Burns so insufferable, so tightly wound and tone-deaf, that he became an indispensable source of conflict. "I knew going in that my job was to be the jerk," he once said. And yet, within that cruelty, Linville insisted on threading a flicker of humanity. A weakness that made Burns more than just a villain. He was someone drowning in his insecurities. A man trying too hard to be important in a world that didn't take him seriously. Then came David Ogden Stiers, a casting decision that risked everything. By the time he joined as Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, MASH had already established its rhythm. The absence left by Linville's departure was like a void in the show's DNA. Replacing Frank Burns with another shallow antagonist would have been easy. But Stiers wasn't interested in easy. He gave Winchester intellect, complexity, and unexpected depth. He wasn't comic relief. He was cultured, cunning, and conflicted. And he didn't try to fill Linville's shoes. He shattered the mold entirely. In a later interview, Stiers admitted the pressure was suffocating. But he also knew that MASH wasn't about playing it safe. And the writers, to their credit, embraced the risk. Each casting decision, in hindsight, looks like destiny. But the truth is far more fragile. These weren't just actors handed roles, they were survivors of a brutal casting process. Threads woven into the tapestry by chance, risk, and sheer will. The chemistry we saw on screen wasn't manufactured, it was earned. Every one of them almost didn't make it. Every character we loved came within inches of being someone else. The brilliance of MASH wasn't just in its writing or its message, it was in the unlikely group of people who brought it to life. And as these actors carved their places into television history, none of them knew that the most emotional chapter of all still lay ahead. It was the end of a show, but also the end of a family. And no one was ready. On February 28, 1983, more than 106 million people tuned in to say goodbye. They didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing something historic. Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, the final episode of MASH, became the most watched television episode in American history. The numbers were staggering, but they couldn't capture the emotion that pulsed through every scene, every pause, every final glance. For viewers, it was the end of a beloved series. For the cast, it was a funeral for a part of themselves. Alda, who had poured his soul into the show, didn't just act in the final episode. He co-wrote and directed it. And that decision came at a cost. As the footage came together, the weight of it all began to crush him. "I couldn't stop crying," he later confessed. In the editing room, Alda broke down not once, but repeatedly. Because this wasn't just about closing a story. It was about closing a decade of life, memory, and identity. Every frame felt like a goodbye, not to characters, but to friends. The laughter they shared, the battles they fought, the stories they built, it was all coming to an end. And no script could prepare them for that. Jaime Farr, known to millions as the quirky yet beloved Corporal Klinger, described those final days as surreal. He remembered trying to hold back tears during his last scene, but the emotion overwhelmed him. "It wasn't acting anymore," he said. It was personal. Loretta Swit echoed the same bittersweet sentiment. She had become Major Houlihan in more than just a costume. The lines between role and reality had long since blurred. And now, standing in the final moments of a show that had shaped their identities, the cast was being asked to walk away. But walking away from family never feels natural. It always hurts. Behind the camera, the atmosphere was just as heavy. Crew members who had worked tirelessly in the shadows now watched the lights go down one last time. Hugs lasted longer. Words caught in throats. No one wanted to be the first to leave the set. The final wrap wasn't just symbolic. It was suffocating. And yet, within that, grief was something beautiful. The real tears mirrored the scripted ones. The story they told in Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen wasn't fiction. It was their own. They weren't just actors bidding farewell to roles. They were people letting go of a decade-long chapter, of shared struggles, of personal growth, of something unrepeatable. That's what made the finale so haunting. It didn't try to escape the emotion. It embraced it. The pain wasn't hidden. It was honored. MASH didn't just end with dignity. It ended with the truth. The kind of truth you can't fake. And in doing so, it sealed its legacy not just through brilliant storytelling, but through the unbreakable bond that existed behind the scenes. Yet even as the show found closure, its deeper controversies had only just begun surfacing. MASH started with laughs, but not everyone laughed at where it was heading. In its earliest seasons, the show played like a fast-paced comedy set against the absurdity of war, filled with punchlines, pranks, and quick wit. It was sharp, satirical. Audiences loved it. But beneath the jokes, a more serious heartbeat began to emerge. As the seasons progressed, the tone began to shift subtly at first, then unmistakably. The jokes stayed, but now they came wrapped in tragedy. And not everyone welcomed the change. What had started as a smart, subversive sitcom was evolving into something far heavier. And while Alda embraced the transformation, many around him struggled with what the show was becoming. Alda wasn't just following his instincts. He was challenging the entire definition of what MASH was supposed to be. For him, the comedy was never the end. It was the disguise, a tool to pull people in before confronting them with the harsh realities underneath. He wanted the truth. War, after all, wasn't funny. It was chaos. It was pain. And Alda believed the show had a duty to reflect that. He pushed for stories that lingered in silence, that didn't always end in laughter. And with growing creative influence, he had the power to steer the ship. But that new direction didn't sit well with everyone, especially not with Larry Gelbart, the original creator. Gelbart had given birth to MASH's signature style, witty, biting, and fast. But after 4 seasons, he walked away. Officially, he cited creative exhaustion. But the truth ran deeper. The pressure from the network was mounting. Expectations were shifting. And as Alda's voice grew louder, Gelbart's own felt increasingly drowned out. He chose to leave before the show transformed into something he no longer recognized. In a rare moment of candor, he admitted, "At some point, you have to know when to move on." His departure marked a turning point. MASH was no longer the show he'd created. It was becoming something entirely different. With Gelbart gone and Alda at the helm, the tonal shift accelerated. Comedy became the doorway. Drama became the destination. Entire episodes would unfold without a single laugh. Characters died. Morality blurred. The war stopped being a backdrop. It became the focus. Some fans called it brilliant. Others felt betrayed. They had tuned in for levity and found themselves staring into an emotional abyss. Even within the cast, there were hushed arguments about whether the soul of the show was being lost or finally discovered. But Alda remained steadfast. He wasn't making entertainment. He was holding up a mirror, and what that mirror reflected was raw, human, and deeply unsettling. MASH was no longer just a sitcom. It had transformed into a social autopsy, a study in trauma, in survival, in quiet despair masked by humor. It was fearless, but the toll was undeniable. Because while creative battles were reshaping the show from the inside, the emotional cost was rising. And one actor, one beloved character, was quietly slipping under the weight of it all. The pressure wasn't just creative, it was personal. And soon, it would break someone who had once been the show's beating heart. He was the heart of the show, but his own heart couldn't take it anymore. Gary Berghoff's Radar O'Reilly wasn't just a character. He was MASH's conscience. Wide-eyed, loyal, and strangely intuitive, Radar saw things others missed. He brought innocence to a war zone, hope to hopelessness. For fans, he was the emotional anchor of the 4077th. But behind the scenes, the man who played him was unraveling. Berghoff, by the time Season 8 rolled around, had nothing left to give. The laughter, the camaraderie, the history, they were all still there. But so was something else, a growing ache, a need to breathe. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he made the decision few expected. He walked away. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a fight. It was something quieter, sadder. "I was burnt out. I needed to step back," Berghoff would later say. The long hours, the emotional weight, the pressure of being Radar, of always having to be Radar, had taken its toll. He loved the show. He loved the people. But the joy had begun to slip away. Passion, when stretched too far, becomes pain. And for Berghoff, the line between performance and self had started to blur. What began as the role of a lifetime had slowly become a burden too heavy to carry. His exit wasn't just another cast change, it felt like a wound. The writers gave him a two-part farewell, and the result was unforgettable. The episodes weren't just for fans, they were for the cast. A chance to say goodbye not just to a character, but to a friend. On screen, Radar left for home. Off screen, Berghoff left for healing. And both departures left a silence that lingered. The final scenes were more than just lines and blocking. They were real. Eyes welled up. Words stumbled. For a moment, the show stopped pretending. It stopped being fiction. It became life. Radar's departure marked a turning point. The innocence of MASH was fading. The tone was darker, the laughter thinner. And though the show would continue for 3 more seasons, something fundamental had shifted. Berghoff's decision echoed beyond the screen. It was a reminder that even the brightest lights can dim. That the cost of storytelling, real, emotional storytelling, isn't always visible. It builds slowly, behind smiles, behind scripts, until one day it becomes unbearable. Radar was the character fans held close, but Gary Berghoff was the man who paid the price for holding him too long. And now, decades later, Alan Alda's latest, words bring that passion and those tensions back into the light. After nearly 9 decades, Alan Alda shares what really mattered and what almost tore it all apart. Time has a way of softening edges, of turning wounds into lessons. And at 89, Alda no longer speaks with urgency, but with a kind of weathered grace. The curtain has long closed on MASH. The lights have dimmed, and the applause has faded into memory. But in the silence, Alda has found something clearer than ever before. The truth. Not the version fans read in magazines or hear in tribute montages. The real truth about the battles, the brilliance, and the bruises left behind by a show that changed his life and nearly consumed it. The tensions people speculated about for years weren't driven by ego. They were born from something far more dangerous vision. The deep, unrelenting belief that MASH could be more than just entertainment. It had the potential to reflect something honest about the human condition. Alda lived with that belief day in and day out. And it shaped everything. His performance, his writing, his direction, his relationships. He didn't just want MASH to succeed. He wanted it to matter. And in that pursuit, he sometimes pushed too far. "I was intense," he admits. "I cared. Maybe too much?" The pressure to make every line truthful, every moment grounded, often meant challenging the people around him, even the ones he loved most. And yet, despite everything, the cast and crew never splintered. They argued, they clashed, they walked away from meetings in silence, but they stayed. They stayed because the mission was bigger than any one person. The show, with all its messy ambition and conflicting ideas, had a pulse that kept them coming back. MASH wasn't just a show about war. It was a show about connection, about broken people trying to heal in impossible circumstances. It was about loss, about absurdity, about finding laughter in the middle of pain. And every actor, every writer, every grip and gaffer knew they were building something that would outlive them all. Looking back, Alda doesn't claim perfection. Far from it. But he doesn't need to, because what MASH offered wasn't polished. It was raw, real. We weren't perfect, but we were real, he says. And there's no bitterness in his voice, only gratitude. The kind that comes when you've seen the worst, given your best, and somehow made it through with your soul intact. Because in the end, MASH wasn't defined by its awards or its record-breaking finale. It was defined by the flawed, passionate people who refused to let it be ordinary. And maybe that's what made MASH so timeless, because behind the comedy, behind the conflict, was a truth we could all feel. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.